So imagine this. The KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner, Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi, walks into Parliament calm and collected, ready to testify before an ad hoc committee investigating political interference in South Africa's criminal justice system. But within minutes, the atmosphere turns from routine parliamentary procedure to pure drama. Microphones are switched on, MPs start interrupting, and suddenly, it feels less like a committee meeting and more like a live political thriller.
Professor Diane Kohler, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Nice talking.
First off, just your initial impression on yesterday. The ad hoc committee got off to a bit of a rocky start, but then, of course, found their groove. What were your impressions?
There's no doubt that it started off not in the ideal context, and we must take into consideration that the committee was already established about a month or two ago, and it's only starting now. And it seems like if people, for example, Mr. Malema is trying to derail the process, not going into action. But fortunately, they worked on this, and after a private in-camera meeting of a number of hours, the testimony of Mkhwanazi started, and what he is revealing is devastating in a political context, and especially for the establishment and specifically the criminal justice system.
Prof, that's interesting when you say that people like Malema were trying to derail the proceedings. The issue that was raised by Malema, seconded, of course, by others on that committee, are you saying that those were not valid issues?
Well, my take on it was issues of a more technical matter. And it was all about the fact that what Mr. Mkhwanazi, or Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi, was delivering was what they called a supplementary statement. Now, a supplementary statement can be seen as an add-on. And from Mr. Malema's perspective, the most important committee is the parliamentary committee. And the parliamentary committee shouldn't work with the supplementary confession. They want to be authentic. Now, my take on it is that we have two parallel processes. We have the executive process referring to the Nhlanhla Commission with its own dynamic. And then we have the legislative process consisting of a committee of inquiry from within Parliament accommodating a number of parties. And these are two different dynamics. And you cannot expect Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi to make one statement on the one side and not making the same one on the other side. Then he will be an unreliable witness. And I believe that this technical matter delay the investigation because we need to take into consideration they want to inquire about 30 plus witnesses, including the president, and they only have about 30 days to complete the process. So there's no time that you can play around. They must do the business as soon and get to the core of the problem.
Which is why I asked you in terms of whether that technicality is important in the broader scheme of things, Prof, because the one committee, of course, the ad hoc committee is of a different arm of the state, the legislative arm of the state, and of course the Nhlanhla Commission set up by the executive arm of the state. But that issue of the supplementary statement, and the argument was made that if it is a supplementary statement is supplementing something that has already been presented. And we saw in the weeks leading up to yesterday's sitting how Parliament and this ad hoc committee in particular were at pains to explain that they are not a subcommittee of the Nhlanhla Commission and that they are a separate entity established to do their own thing. So In that context, is it not important, therefore, and nobody said that he needed to write a completely new statement, but the commission needed to present, the ad hoc committee rather, its own statement, not something that is supplemented from the Nhlanhla Commission. Is that not materially important?
Yeah, I don't think that is materially important in terms of the functioning of the commission. This, to me, is more of a technical matter. If you called it a supplementary statement or if you call it a witness statement, it doesn't differ. What is important is the content. But I think the important point you made is the fact that this ad hoc committee is a very important committee. And this is probably the more important investigation of the two, because it is representative of a number of parties, and they can start a legislative process in terms of their oversight function, keeping the president and other people responsible for what is happening. In that sense, the activity of this committee is of critical importance, and to me it is more important that the committee start doing its work rather than to be concerned about more technical matters. And I believe this is a technical matter, and it was reconciled in the fact that Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi was established as a witness, and the witness testimony, in that sense, the process continue. But the important thing is who are implicated, what are the nature of the problem, and that is of a very, very serious nature. And it also seems to me as if what the Lieutenant General presented at the Mkhwanazi investigation is only the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to come, and it will be interesting to see how other people, and I think 3 police ministers, former police ministers, one on leave, is implicated in this regard. Also, the president of the country, there are the Brown Mkhwanazi and the Kat Nhlanhlas, and it will be very interesting to see what the outcome of this will be and how Parliament is going to deal with this. This is a very strong ad hoc committee, a committee that can really change the position of South Africa and re-establish the functioning of democratic institutions and help securing the criminal justice system, which is really in trouble at the moment.
And of course, the infiltration coming from various places. And one of the things that the general also revealed was that there were members of parliament who may also have interfered inappropriately in some police work. He mentioned Fadil Adams, he mentioned Diane Kohler Barnard. And speaking of the presence of DA Member of Parliament Diane Kohler Barnard in that ad hoc committee, Mkhwanazi named her. She was sitting there in the commission and in the committee rather, and of course he said she was one of the people who allegedly politically interfered, and there would be questions of I would imagine in that regard as well. So what did you make of that, Diane Kohler Barnard and her presence on this ad hoc committee?
Well, my understanding is she is one of the rotating members of that committee. They have put people in place to replace the permanent members of the committee if necessary. But the nature of the problem raised by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi has to do with the dissemination of information. And the problem is that Kohler Barnard allegedly made information available that was sensitive and could influence the investigations of the police in some way or another. From what I picked up in the media was that her reaction focused on the fact that this information was already available within the context of the media. So in that sense, we need to wait for the nature of the content and try to assess the sensitivity of it. But it is interesting that politicians, even people of parliament, are implicated, police are implicated, as well as other institutions within the more comprehensive context of the criminal justice system. And basically, this is the type of evidence that is motivating the case that South Africa qualify as a criminal state or a mafia state, with serious risks for not only our democratic dispensation, but also for the state and the functioning of the state. So this matter is very serious. We need answers quickly, and we need decisions. And it is important that this time it cannot become just another report ending on the desk of the president without reacting in terms of its contents. And I believe the parliamentary process, the ad hoc committee, will make sure that this case will get the necessary attention and the necessary action. And that is why the functioning of the ad hoc committee is so important.
Just a quick one before we end this. Notwithstanding the fact that Diane Kohler Barnard, of course, not a permanent member of this ad hoc committee, in for Glynis Breitenbach, who's at the JSC hearings, interviews, I should say. Do you think that, given what the general has actually stated in terms of what she is alleged to have done, should she be a part of this committee, or should the DA replace her?
Well, my take on it will be that I should say it's better to replace her. But at the same point, we can argue that the position of Soviet Nhlanhla is also problematic, because what Mkhwanazi is saying is implicating the ANC as a party very directly. So there is also a conflict of interest in some way. So if you can work with one conflict of interest, you can probably accommodate another one. But in real principle, I believe it will be better to get a clear differentiation, and it will be better to replace her until her name is clear in this regard.
Now, for those who haven't been following this closely, Mkhwanazi is at the center of one of the most talked about hearings in recent memory. Earlier this year, he made explosive claims that certain political figures were meddling in police investigations. Basically, that politics and policing had gotten a little too cozy. Political analyst summed it up perfectly when he said it didn't start in the ideal context. In typical South African political fashion, there was confusion about procedure, documentation, and who was actually running the show. One of the key points of tension came from Julius Malema, who raised concerns about the nature of Mkhwanazi's statement. He argued that the document presented was a supplementary statement, meaning it was an add-on to something that had already been submitted to the Mchanga Commission, a separate executive inquiry. Malema's argument was that Parliament shouldn't rely on a supplementary statement from another process. He wanted the committee to get its own, fresh, unlinked statement from Mkhwanazi. It might sound technical, but in politics, technicalities are never just technicalities. They can decide whether a process moves forward or grinds to a halt. But Duvenage disagreed. He said this was more of a procedural hiccup than a real issue. In his view, whether you call it a supplementary statement or a witness statement doesn't change the fact that what really matters is the content, and the content, as we've seen, is explosive. He pointed out that the ad hoc committee is not a subcommittee of the Mchanga Commission. It's a completely separate arm of the state, the legislative branch, tasked with oversight, meaning, while one body is an executive commission investigating policy and conduct, this parliamentary committee has the power to hold political leaders accountable, including the president. And that's where things get even more interesting. Mkhwanazi's testimony hasn't just hinted at political meddling, it's reportedly pointed fingers at some big names. Duvenage noted that 3 former police ministers and even the president himself could be drawn into the matter, depending on how deep the investigation goes. That's why this isn't just another committee meeting. This could reshape how South Africans view their entire justice system. According to Duvenage, what Mkhwanazi revealed might only be the tip of the iceberg. There could be layers upon layers of political influence, interference, and questionable dealings that have compromised the independence of the police. If proven true, it suggests that the lines between law enforcement and political power have blurred in ways that threaten the democratic fabric of the country. But the drama didn't stop there. During the hearing, Mkhwanazi dropped another name, or rather, a few. He mentioned that members of parliament themselves had allegedly interfered in police work. One of those names was DA Member of Parliament Diane Kohler Barnard. Now imagine the tension in that room when he said it, because she was sitting right there in the committee when her name came up. It's not every day that you get accused of political interference in the very meeting that's supposed to be investigating it. So what exactly did Mkhwanazi accuse her of? He claimed that she had improperly shared sensitive information that could have influenced police investigations. Kohler Barnard, of course, defended herself, saying the information she shared was already in the public domain, available through the media. Whether or not that explanation holds up is something Parliament will have to assess as the hearings continue. Professor Duvenage weighed in on this too. He explained that Kohler Barnard was a rotating member of the committee, filling in temporarily for Glynis Breitenbach, who was away at Judicial Service Commission interviews. But still, her presence in the room while being named in the testimony raises serious ethical questions. Duvenage said that ideally she should be replaced, at least until her name is cleared, to avoid any perception of conflict of interest. However, he was quick to point out the irony here. If we're talking about conflicts of interest, the ANC representatives on the committee could also face the same scrutiny since Mkhwanazi's allegations implicate the governing party as well. So it's one of those if we remove one, we might have to remove everyone kind of situations. What's clear is that this case has cracked open a long simmering debate in South Africa. Is the criminal justice system being manipulated by political power? And if so, how deep does it go? Duvenage didn't mince his words. He said the situation points to the troubling possibility of South Africa functioning as what some analysts call a criminal state or a mafia state, where corruption, collusion, and manipulation have become so normalized that even oversight bodies struggle to keep up. And here's the scary part. He's not exaggerating. South Africans have seen this pattern before. From state capture to the manipulation of intelligence agencies, political interference in law enforcement is not new. But what makes this case stand out is that it's being aired openly in Parliament, under oath, in front of multiple parties, and with the media watching closely. That's what makes it historic. Not just what's being said, but where and how it's being said. Duvenage's final point was powerful. He warned that this time, the outcome cannot simply be another report gathering dust on the president's desk. South Africans are tired of endless investigations that end with no accountability. This, he argued, is the moment for Parliament to show that oversight still means something, that no one, not even those in the highest offices, is above scrutiny. So, as Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi continues his testimony, the stakes couldn't be higher. The ad hoc committee has about 30 days to hear testimony from more than 30 witnesses, including, potentially, the president himself. That's a tall order, and time is ticking. The hearings could expose one of the most significant political scandals of the decade, or, if mishandled, become another missed opportunity to restore faith in South Africa's justice system. One thing's for sure, South Africans are watching closely, and whether you see this as a moment of reckoning or just another chapter in a long story of political intrigue, it's a reminder that accountability, though slow, still has a chance to fight back. The question now is, will Parliament rise to the occasion, or will this too fade into the background of South Africa's endless struggle between power and justice? Whatever happens next, it's clear that this is not just about Mkhwanazi's testimony. It's about the credibility of the entire criminal justice system. And in a democracy, when justice is compromised, everything else is up for grabs. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over.